Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Subtext Podcast Archives. These are the long-lost episodes of the Subtext that were originally produced between 2015 and 2017. In 2018, the Subtext moved to American Theater Magazine, and we've been producing the pod there monthly ever since. These time capsules are being shared here in their entirety, including plenty of outdated references and advertisements for events far in the past. If you enjoy them, please subscribe to the current podcast feed for the Subtext or stream new episodes on the website for American Theater Magazine. Thank you for listening. There's this black cloud that's always been following me around like an unwanted pet. I wasn't a good kid growing up, at least not in any obvious ways. In the obvious ways, I was trouble. I got into fights with other kids at school, I yelled at teachers, I threw tantrums at home, and my poor older sister and classmates were often caught in the unfriendly fire. I was trouble 24/7. I mean that literally. Even in the middle of the night. As a kid, I wet my bed, forcing my mother to do load after load of laundry. Now, there are many kinds of black clouds. Mine was a bedwetting, tantrum-throwing, dark cloud hovering over me everywhere I went. I don't know how I survived junior high school. I don't know how people survived me. I was a teacher terror, I was a parent terror, I was a terror, and that goddamn black cloud always made me mad whenever somebody would poke fun at my last name, or if I wouldn't be given the attention I thought I needed. I got so angry once during math class that I threw a ruler up into the air and smashed a fluorescent light, causing the glass and chemicals to fall onto the heads of my classmates like a dangerous snowfall. The problems continued in high school when I got arrested. Twice. Once was for shoplifting a controller for a video game. The second time was for helping friends steal beer from a warehouse. It was one thing after another with me. Thank you, Dark Cloud. On top of that, my grades were middling at best. I wasn't particularly good at anything. I played plenty of sports, although not well. Weirdly, I had friends. Looking back, I'm not quite sure why anybody wanted to be around me. I was such a downer, sad and angry and depressed all the time. At least, that's how I remember it. But I got through it all somehow. Part of it was because, even though I kept doing the wrong things, I always wanted to do the right things. I had self-awareness. I just didn't know that's what you called it. I shouldn't take all the credit. Sure, I wanted to be a good person, but I really got through those years because I had teachers who believed in me and friends who liked me. Because of them, I eventually stopped getting arrested, I improved my grades, and I got myself into college. But the dark cloud followed me through my 20s and 30s. Hell, I'm 41 now as I record this, and I can see the cloud hovering right over there, kind of chilling out and biding its time. Sometimes, when it hovers right over me, I feel a sense of foreboding. My chest gets tight, I feel emotional, I cry. I don't do the same stupid things I did when I was younger, but this menace can be overwhelming. Playwriting helps me keep it all together. Protects me from the cloud like an amulet. When I became a grown-up, and for me this wasn't until my early 30s, playwriting became my purpose. It is the singular reason why I'm sitting here today. If I never came to this playwriting thing and stuck with it, who knows where my dark cloud would have carried me. That doesn't mean any of this is easy. Every day is a struggle, and sometimes things get heavy, but I have people around who pick me up, and to be honest, I find joy in the work. Even in the failure of it, I find joy. If I had this joy growing up, that cloud of mine might not have grown so strong, but then again, maybe I need the struggle. What would I have to say without it? And I know I'm not alone. I don't know if that helps, but it's true. So, this episode is for everybody who struggles with their own dark clouds. Welcome to the Subtext, Episode 4. The Subtext is sponsored this month by Geffen Playhouse, presenting the West Coast premiere of These Paper Bullets, a modish ripoff of William Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, now on stage in the Gil Cates Theater. Grammy Award-winning Green Day frontman Billy Joe Armstrong, Pulitzer Prize finalist Roland Jones, and acclaimed director Jackson Gay riff on Shakespeare's randy tale with a serious backbeat. Tickets, cast info, and more at geffenplayhouse.com. This month, we're talking to Luis Alfaro. I call him the quintessential Los Angeles playwright. He's also a performance artist, poet, teacher, social activist, and all-around excellent human being. And you're about to hear why.
I'm so terrified right now.
Are you nervous?
No, you know what? Actually, I've done a few radio interviews, and things I've learned is if you're going to sneeze, kind of sneeze away. But, you should do that in real life anyways.
I always thought that's what the microphone was for, to catch your
Yeah.
sneeze.
I sometimes make love to the mic, but that's just because Beyonce does it. Okay.
That's a good general rule for life, right?
Is this a playwriting question?
You want your first playwriting question?
It's your show. You do it, everyone.
Who is your all-time favorite alum of the USC dramatic writing program?
You know what? I don't have one. I'm just kidding. Clearly, listen, it's a neck and neck right now between you and Nathan and Madre. But I'm just looking to see which one of you doesn't screw up your life, and then I will decide. Do I have to decide? I will decide by the end of this podcast.
I feel like I have my work cut out for me against Nathan and Madre.
Now, we could do a whole hour based on your experience at USC.
We could. We won't. We won't, because this is more about you than me.
Okay.
More about you.
Okay. I'm going to keep referring to it,
Well, I don't know if you know this, but you are the reason why I went to USC in the first place.
Really?
Yeah, we met in 2010 at the Theater of Boston Court when they did your play. I shouldn't say they. I was part of it.
You were part of it.
When we did Oedipus El Rey.
That's right.
And at this time, I was in a very sort of transitional period because my wife and I moved to LA to be famous TV writers, and we were working together as like writing partners. And I was becoming more and more infatuated with theater and writing plays than I was with writing television. And I had been talking to my wife about possibly going to grad school. I was very jealous of her because she had her MFA, and I was like, that's the thing I think I want to explore. And then I met you, and I said, I want to learn from this person. And I learned you taught at USC, so I said, I'm applying to USC. And that was the only place I applied. I said, if I get my MFA, it'll be here at USC.
Wow.
Or I won't get one, and that'll go on a different path.
Wow. That's amazing because, sometimes we make choices as writers that are like, I'll just leave it open. But I love when you make a choice like that. That's like, it's either this or the universe, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you kind of made a big choice.
Yeah.
One choice.
Right.
Wow.
And and
I'm honored.
And I don't regret it.
Well, I somewhat regret. Just kidding. It's interesting just to say one thing about teaching. I think you teach what you need to learn. I've always really believed that. And I think that every person who gets an MFA becomes a great teacher. Like, you're a great teacher now. And partly I think it's not that you witness great teaching necessarily, but I think you witness the process of yourself. Learning how to think in a different way. And not that you didn't already have that, but I think in a way graduate school does create a little bit of space to pull out of the real world,
Right.
And so I keep thinking a lot about that. I think a lot about teaching and how I want to make it. Every year I get better at it, I have to say, but I do think it's a lot about how you want to help facilitate a process. And for me, I feel like that's what I'm doing, helping other people facilitate their process. I study with Irene Fornes, and then I study with Mac Wellman and Paula Vogel and people like that. And the thing I loved about every single one, I had one not so great teacher, and I can't tell you who it is because they're alive and then down. But I would say that each one of those teachers, none of us wrote like them. None of us tried to be them. And I think that was surely by example. I think you look at Paula Vogel and you say, wow, it's not that you want to write like her. It's you want to have the spirit of her. You want to have the energy of her. You want to have the generosity of her. right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think sometimes that's what happens in the world of art, but it happens to us as colleagues. I mean, you and I have such intense conversations. When do we not have an
Right, I
intense,
know. I know. And
you
now
know?
we're recording one.
I know, and this one's gonna be like the least interesting one of all time. But no, I'm serious. Like I think we have intense conversations because in some way we are artists who are trying to like sort of unlock a mystery, right?
Hmm.
So I feel like that a lot these days. I feel like I'm in community to not only be inspired but also to create something. And so every time you kind of come together with another artist, you do in fact kind of create something together. Even if in that moment something inspires you. So like at the Getty, for instance, there's this antiquities scholar, Mary Hart, who's hilarious. And the least candidate in my life for someone who would become my friend.
Hmm.
Like heady, kind of nerdy, like older than me, kind of, very much by the book. And yet she's turned out to be one of those people where I would say, when I have conversations with her, I write plays. What happened? Like, what
Hmm.
happened?
Hmm.
Right? And I think that happens with us too, right? So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. I, I think that in my personal journey, coming to you was at the timing couldn't have been better because I was, despite my age, I think I was at my final sort of stage of discovering myself and understanding. Not I mean, we never stop, but
No,
like
I get
that
what you're saying.
last sort of big moment where you
Yeah,
learn, oh, this is who I am and this is what I care about.
yeah,
And I think I came in at the right time.
right.
I'm a little bit older than some of the other grad students,
Hmm.
but from a writing perspective, I was still very much a young writer, so it was all happening at the same time, and then it all kind of started to lock in as soon as I.
Yeah, you did this play in the second year about the kids. That was second year, right?
Right, right.
I think that was a very interesting year. Like second year was a very interesting year for you. Like I remember the first year you were very heady, and then the second year you were like frustrated and in a kind of good way, a playwright way, you were upset a lot, you know? And I think by the time you got to the third year, those expressions, a play about disability, right?
Hmm.
A play about war, responsibility, relationship. I mean, that was really interesting. You wrote a play in my class.
Right.
There was that little play became such a big, huge thing, right? But I think the themes inside that play were things that were probably just really bouncing and resonating off of you in enormous ways.
Hmm.
So I don't think that you can write something like that in the first year. I think you probably do write it in the third year because that's when it happens. That's when it hits
It's like
you.
it's a culmination. It's a.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think of life in that way. I think you sort of I have a lot of little culmination moments when I do research, for instance. The research culminates, and I can tell it's culminating because I have enough to start writing, and also there's just a moment when you have to stop that, right? There's a moment where you have to like I think there's something in my head that says, "Okay, this is sort of the natural animal moment to stop grazing and make my way back to the
Hmm.
farmhouse."
Hmm.
Like I just describe myself as a farm animal. I love it. But we're going to edit this, right?
Yeah,
And
we'll bleep that.
but what's amazing about that is that I think instinctually you kind of say to yourself, yeah, I've done enough of this. Now I have to start doing this.
Hmm.
Now I have so. I think what's amazing about playwriting these days is that the world is sort of not in on our process that way. The business of playwriting has kind of jumped ahead, right? So regional theaters, for instance, they don't lengthen your hours; they shorten them. So sometimes your process has to like be speeded up.
Hmm.
So a lot of what I'm doing these days is negotiating new processes.
Hmm.
Like I just had this experience in San Francisco with the play, right, Delano, and I knew I was going to write. I wrote the play, and then I knew I was going to really write the play by really writing, editing that play, and previews. There was no way I was going to be done by the time we got an audience in, right? So the negotiation with the funder and with the theater was that I would get 11 previews. Who gets 11 previews, right? I got 11 previews, but then I only ran for 2 weeks. But I'm
Hmm.
okay with that because it's the first production of a new play, and I really shook down that play. So I went from a 2 hours and 45 minute, you know, into tech, and then 2 hours and 30 minutes into first preview and then into an hour and a half no intermission opening night.
But your collaborators were all on board with that process?
Yeah, you have to get them on board. I mean, I think if one person says like, "Oh my God," or like, "I'm just this is not working for me," then it's not good. And there are moments, there was an amazing moment with the actress who was so soulful, and truly, she turned into a little bit of a muse for me. And the play started being about her husband, and then I met her, and literally, like in the first day, I was like, "Oh my God, this is a transformative, interesting." Amazing actor. Her name is Sarah Nina Hayan. Come from New York, had gone to NYU, was part of the Labyrinth Theater Company. She had
Mm-hmm.
all the like ingredients of things that like I knew, like
Mm-hmm.
processes that I already knew, or of the type of work that she had done. And she had worked with like one of my favorite playwrights, Sam Hunter. So I kind of knew that she could handle this world. And so what happened is I like immediately went like zoomed
Mm-hmm.
in on her character and started writing things for her. And then what happened is midway through the process, it was just literally the technical aspect of like, okay, Luis has cut 7 pages, so let's work this, and we're doing this on Tuesday because we're gonna go up tonight. So let's work this in the morning. Let's memorize this. Let's put it in our bodies. Let's run it a few times, and then let's do it tonight. Here we go. Right? So it takes a certain kind of actor to be in that process. And then Sean San Jose, who's this legend of San Francisco, who's fabulous, he picks up a script. He has trouble memorizing, but what's amazing, if he is the character, he has no problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting watching him. He would only memorize in character. He's like in his outfit. He like literally gets
Right.
into costume, which is
He
hilarious
needs
to
his
watch.
entire
He
being
needs
to
his
be part of
being,
the process.
because then he's really playing the guy. It's not him as a kind of technical thing. So he looks at the script, looks it over, and he goes, "Okay." And then they get in there, and it always shocked me. And so he got a lot of new lines because I knew he could handle new lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of interesting to watch. So, kind of getting people to join your process these days is one of the huge, gigantic parts of, I think, playwriting. We used to, when I first started this one, the olden days when I first started, I remember when I first went to the Goodman in the 80s, it was 6 weeks rehearsal, right? Now it's 3 weeks rehearsal, including, tech.
Time is money, right?
Time is money. And so when I was in Chicago, the last time I was in Chicago at Victory Gardens, Che Yu, the director, said, "I just want to let you know, next week, I know we just started, but next week we do a stumble through for designers."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, the actors haven't even gotten up on their feet. He goes, "That's why we're going to like do a solid week of table work,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going to get up and just paint." And then you get a certain kind of designer that's going to do something maybe a little more broad and not so specific because let's be real, like, the actor just got up and started to move organically in space. And then you get a good lighting designer who's there with you in the entire process so she can just keep focusing and focusing and
Mm-hmm.
focusing. But even that is a change in the American theater, right? In the way they want the writing.
I want to step back. You said going back to the olden days. One of the questions that I've had for you, and we've because when you and I get together and have conversations, they end up being so deep and intense and about the now.
Yeah, yes, of course.
Uh, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about our origins, really, and I've been very curious about because I've heard a lot of your stories that you performed on stage, and I know some of your work. The curiosity that I've had is you coming out of your family and becoming an artist,
Hmm.
and how, like, what was the trigger that had you take that step rather than go into the family business or some other business or some other field?
I think it was I think one of the reasons I think we get along so well is we're both working class kids, right? We come from that kind of, world. I would say that, being raised in downtown Los Angeles in Pico Union was really poor and really desperate, really violent, I would say. So that I was always sort of looking for a way to survive it. And part of it was the one thing I was conscious of is I saw a lot of death when I was a kid. Just like, somebody's shot and then, they have the white sheet over the body. So those things really, I think, even if you're you have a kind of innocence as a child. I think those things were really present, and it was clear there was a survival mode that you kick into, and I knew I didn't want to join a gang, and I knew I didn't want to sort of like, you know, I don't know. I guess I just knew there was something else, right? So religion was one way, but the other way was just to write about things. So the writing, the journaling, even at a young age, was something that I started to do probably instinctually. I wrote something for my like fourth, fifth grade class, and then it stuck that that I could keep writing. And then of course I always had those teachers, those amazing, extraordinary people who. Uh, I went to a school called Brendo Junior High, Brendo Middle School. It's still there, and at the time it was super super violent. So there was always a fight and the whole thing. And I had this really interesting English teacher who loved my essays, and her name was Mrs. Jackson. So she hired me, and I would get $1 a day to stay in the classroom with her and help her pick up the books and do all this stuff. I think it was her way of like, let me just try to give him a sanctuary, a safe space, right?
She saw something.
Yeah, and I think she was sort of like, go write something on this or this. So I think I always had those kinds of things that got me through those experiences. So when I left home, I think I was already like in high school, I was already clear that I wanted to do theater, that I wanted to do, that I was expressing myself in writing and that sort of thing. I just didn't have a lot of the experience. So I had, my mother and father were tremendous in the way that they didn't see culture in LA as being part of what they owned,
Mm-hmm.
because they were just, my dad worked like 3 jobs, my mom worked 2 jobs. But, on Saturdays, my mother would drive me to the music center. I would get out and buy a student ticket and see, I saw like the Wiz. I saw Chicago with Gwen Verdon, Cheetah Rivera. I saw Sweeney Todd. I saw all the shows, right? And so the thing was, my mother would park across the street at the Department of Water and Power, and at intermission, I'd go get her a soda from the bar and take it to the car. I mean, like, so my parents never went in, but I went in. And then what started happening was when my little sister was old enough, I took my little sister in with me, right? So my little sister and I sort of have like a history of that kind of culture and seeing things like that. But all of those experiences were amazing experiences because my parents had no language for it or no idea what I was seeing. So I could have just said to them, hey, there's a great European film called Deep Throat and I should see it. And they would have driven me to it. Thank God I didn't do that, right? But I went to see like the great, there was an Irish playwriting festival here that brought all the great Irish writers. And I remember seeing, in The Belly of the Beast, I talked a lot about that experience being
Mm-hmm.
so profound. And about a serial killer. And then, I saw all of the Mark Taper Forums early. Like, I saw all their work in the 70s, which was their heyday of like great political, all the big, the really great disturbing writers, right? It was the beginning of Lamford Wilson and all of that, right? Seeing all those off Broadway people that became legends. So, I knew it was in me. I just didn't know how to do it. So, my version of it was to go downtown before this was this. It was, like I was at a little theater called Wall and Boyd on Wall and Boyd in Skid Row. And I just joined a performance workshop. And then I had a friend who lit a show. And she said, you should come see this guy. So then I went, and it was Jan Monroe, who was like a neighbor of mine. And so I went and helped on that. So people think that I kind of popped on the scene, because when I popped on the scene, I just popped on the scene. But in truth, I'd had 10 years of like lighting design, and I lit everybody's shows in town. And I was a stage manager for Padua Hills Playwrights for many summers. I was at the Actors Gang when they first started. I was an usher for like the volunteer usher for all their shows. So I saw everything, right? Like I literally saw everything. And I think I did that good artisting, which is to say, this is super cool and I'm going to do this one day. This sucks and I will never make this mistake.
Was there somebody that you saw who made you think, I want to do these performances, because you are known for having a sort of aesthetic of your own in your
Yeah.
solo performance work early on. Did somebody kind of like lock you into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the early years that there was a theater space. It's hard to say theater, but it was called LACE, Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions. Jessica Hagedorn, the who wrote Dog Eaters, and the most famous, wonderful Filipina playwright, poet, short story novelist. Jessica in the 80s was kind of doing these solo shows like I was doing. And seeing her tell her Filipino story was like, and tell it in the most transgressive, amazing, all in visual images kind of way, was, there was a lot of that. I would say maybe she was a really important figure. I think Tim Miller's work, like, let me tell you my story, and I'm big gay guy and I'm just gonna like come right out and be sexual and be political and and at the same time I was also doing a lot of political work. I used to work for the ACLU, I worked for a union. So Tim was somebody that I got arrested with a bunch of times. And we laugh about it now, but we got arrested and were put into the federal building, which was that's pretty scary because
Mm-hmm.
you don't mess with the government, right? But we were at the bottom, 6 floors under, in this private cell. About 12 of us, right? And I was sitting next to Tim Miller, and we're having this conversation. I was scared. I have to say, I was like the biggest arrest I had done at
How
that
old
time.
were you at the time?
Oh, I think I was 21 maybe, and trying to figure it out. And we were down there, and they kind of cut off communication. And usually when you get arrested, there's somebody who is like at the ACLU, you get a buddy. So that person has your wallet. That person is taking pictures of you. They're documenting you. And this one, the cops were really aggressive, like hitting us and putting us in a cell. Kind of like you couldn't do it in the way you normally did. It took away all the phones, that kind of thing. So we were down there, and he's like, "So tell me about your work." And I think he sensed that I was really nervous, and we started talking about work. And I remember it was like 6 hours of like intensity about how he did his work, how he started PS 122 in New York, how he started Highways. And so I think in a way there was always somebody like that. Ron Votter, who's not alive anymore. But, I saw a lot. I saw an amazing performance that was written by a guy named Philip Dimitri Galas. His sister is Diamanda Galas, the famous performance artist. He died of AIDS. And he wrote a piece called Mona Rogers in Person, which eventually I directed and did in LA for a long time. And it's a woman who lives in San Diego who doesn't care about anything. And I had read about it and read about it and read about it. And it was being done in San Francisco and had run for like 4 years every night at midnight. It was a midnight show. And there was a woman named Mona Rogers with the big old beehive who chain smokes the whole thing. And she has a friend named Little Fatty who is a doll that's dressed exactly like her that stands on the side of the stage. And it was like the most amazing writing. And it was all about like this woman who's stuck down at the ports in San Diego. And, she's just fooling around like sailors and smoking, and then it's just commentary in America, right? And I thought, wow, this is so right up my alley. The writing's amazing, the performance is extraordinary, like everything was the right thing. So I would say that like Philip Dimitri Galas was like those first 5 plays.
Mm-hmm.
Bitter Homes and Gardens opens, with a woman throwing tortillas out at the audience, right? Really in a kind of ode to him. So and then the other thing was because I was studying with Irene Fornes, she always did these things where she'd say, "You're putting too much pressure on yourself. You're so, it's just because you're young and you want to make an impression, but there's all these people that existed before you and all these people that will exist after you. And you're the one that gets to be here to tell the story of today. So just relax, right?" And the other thing is, you put everything in your place. Like, I would put love, death, family. Like, characters would show up in the last 5 minutes and they'd say, like, "I have a story." Like, it'd be like crazy, right? And she said, she goes, "If you're going to do this for the rest of your life, you could stand to just say this one thing here, this one thing there, and that's a play. And if you're going to write 40, 50 plays, relax into it because you have to pace yourself if you're going to do this forever." And it was such a good lesson, the idea of not feeling that just one play was going to have to say everything about me, right? Or everything that I wanted to say. But also, as a person of color, there's so few opportunities in major theaters. So when you get that one opportunity, we always ruin it because, in a way, we put the kitchen sink in, right? Because we just think we're not going to get another chance. So by the time I started to get produced like on a larger scale, it was clear that one of the things that people were responding to was that I wasn't trying to say everything. I was trying to say one thing about something. And the other thing was I got really into actors, like loving actors, trusting them, enjoying what they did, going to acting class. I would not sample. What's the word? There's a word where you can go and not survey, but anyway, I'm forgetting the word. But you go to a lot of acting studios, and you can kind of go and do one class. Do you know what the word?
Audit.
Audit. Thank you.
Yeah.
You could tell that my close relationship to taxes. Anyway, so I would audit a lot of classes, and the thing that happened with that is that I ended up really trusting actors to do the work of the play, to like find the actors that I wanted to work with, but also letting the actor do a lot of great work, you know? So then when you're doing that, you can't throw in the whole kitchen sink, right? And so like an early play was Straight as a Line, which was completely came out of going to Milton Casales, who used to be a famous acting coach. And I was sitting there and he said, just follow one thread in your life right now. He was talking to an actor. What's the emotional thread in your life? And I was thinking, I had a friend, Gil Quadros, who had written a book called City of God for City Lights Books, beautiful book of poetry, and he had just died. And I was around during all of his illness. He had died of AIDS, and the last like few weeks were really hard to visit. And I'd sort of decided if I was going to do all this marching and all this arresting and all this stuff, I had to also look at that in the face, you know. And he was such a dear friend, and he was so nice, so sweet, even to his end. It was about accommodating his guests versus himself, you know? So I just remember how just literally the body, the destruction of the body. And so, you know, I walked out of that experience and I was like in deep grief. So that was the thread I followed on that play. How do I write a play about a comedy about grief? Like just follow grief as an emotion. And, you know, that play did really well. And I think I learned so much about just how to follow a thread, you know, and not worry about everything else. And so when the dramaturgy came, even when I would go into nice theaters, big theaters, where sometimes they over dramatize your plays or dramaturg them, right? I could tell that everybody would say like, "Wow, this is so like special or precious or on its thread." It's hard to ask you questions, right? Like it's hard to like want to suggest that you know, give us more exposition on the mother, and they would say like let that just be. And I always remember my reviews were like, I got this amazing New York Times review for that play, just amazing. It wasn't the greatest review, it was the most considered review that I've ever gotten in my life. That and another one by a woman named Emma Greenstein. But this review, the guy says there's so much wrong with this play, but there's so much more right with it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think about playwriting that way. It's like, you know, yeah, we could all write the well-written play, but can we write the play that changes you, right? Can we write the play that sort of rocks your world, that moves you, that knocks you off your feet for that moment, right? Can you do something like that?
Have you written one? Can you point to one that makes you feel like where you've knocked yourself off your feet?
Um, I've cried through a few of them, right? Like where I've really wept in them. I think because Oedipus came out so fast, I would say that Oedipus came out as good as I thought I could do at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I reached that eighth production at Victory Gardens, that's where I was like, I unlocked something, and it wasn't me, you know. Really, it was the director. I mean, I love collaboration, and I love it when people help you and guide you. But the director Che Yu was like, that ending is not the right ending for your play. And you know, so the first week you're like, yeah, well, listen, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So you're doing all that
I've
stuff.
had 7 productions of this play.
Exactly. What do you know? But then you know what happened is that it's as we started moving through it, he did that beautiful thing of just kind of showing me why it didn't work, right? And then I met an actor there, a guy named Arturo Soria, who was a beautiful young actor. And these things are always by chance and accident, but an actor dropped out, so he got cast, and then he got moved up into this part of Creon, right? And every critic had sort of always in the 7 productions always said like that's an underdeveloped character, and this actor just took to it, and I saw it and I thought, oh, I get it. So I wrote it around him and then filled in that part of a missing play. And then the ending came, you know, like a first preview. He said, just try something. And I wrote something that came out of my heart, and we never changed another word again. Like we never had to change it. It was like, this is exactly. And you could tell that the audience went like, oh, like they got the ending of the play, you know? So I love those moments. And so I would say something like that. I mean, right now I'm working on Mojada, and I feel like I've never written a tighter 90 minutes. And, you know, I keep just tightening and tightening and tightening and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and everything keeps sort of like pulling that elastic as far as it can go. So I feel really excited about that. Like the newer plays always are like, I wish people understood that, it's for me, it's like, I know you have to get the big reviews at the first production, but I wish they really would wait, because I think the second production of Delano is going to be so much better. But, I really like it, and I love that people like it. So I can tell when I'm onto something because, okay, so, the singer Grace Jones.
Mm-hmm.
She says she can't sing a song until she salivates properly. And so what happens is that, she kind of records and records and then warms up and warms up. And then you start hitting the groove or the rhythm of a song and you salivate a lot. You're like wet, right? And I was thinking, this is very true of writing for me, that when I finally find my rhythm as a writer, or I find my humor, or I start to get into the world then I know that I'm on the right path. So like Delano, we did the first few passes, and it was like, interesting. I could tell everybody was getting really interesting. And then I went back, and then I did my thing and the thing that I wanted to do, and it was like 16 wrote first, and then it was like, okay, there I am. I found myself, right? And then I started filling it in. And once I find myself, I'm okay. So beginnings are always hard. I mean, that's why I think I get so into research, because I'm just so trying to find myself in the material. I think I have a lot of great ideas, but finding yourself, or finding your rhythm, your style, the language is yours, the way a character speaks, that has to like come, and you have to, be patient and also force it a little. It's an interesting game, right? It's raising the raising of a child, right? So I find that I'm always trying to like make sure that I'm in it, and I can tell when I'm not in it. So I will readily agree that Electricidad is probably not my play. It's like a technical play, and then the other two are more my plays.
The other two Greeks.
Yeah, the first one was more like I was playing with the notion of Mexicanism, our ability to laugh at death. So I played with a lot of morbid humor. And I remember sitting at opening night, there was this guy, he's probably still alive, so I can't say his name. He's an idiot, so I'll say his name, Michael Phillips. He wrote for no, not Michael Phillips, James Taylor. James Taylor. How dare he have the other James Taylor's name? Anyway, he was a critic. James Taylor, he's an idiot. I'm sorry. And so he sat there at opening night, and he was in front of me. He didn't know I was behind him, right? And he kept leaning over to his friend. He says, "They're laughing at the Greeks. They're laughing. This is supposed to be serious." I already knew where the review was going to go, right? And the thing was that I was introducing the audience to Greeks, right? And then that's when I learned that I have to give something to the purists, and I have to give something to the new audience, which is always new in my world, and I have to give something to the regional theater audience, and I have to give something to the community audience, so that you're always doing a dance.
It's interesting that somebody refused to let go that this was a Greek. This is Electra, and it will always be Electra, no matter how you've completely re-envisioned it, and every word in it is yours.
Listen, I just had a dramaturgy session where somebody said to me, so does Medea murder the child to get revenge on Jason Hasson, or does she murder the child to save him? And I said, save him. That's my take on it. That's what I'm doing. They said 99.9% of the people are there to see Medea take revenge on Jason. I said, well, listen, I can't worry about the 99.9%, but I will work towards trying to get them to agree that this other way is way more interesting and something they haven't seen before in a play, and they might enjoy that. But I heard what they were saying loud and clear. Mm-hmm. The audience is coming in very prejudiced on a play they already know, right? My question is, if you know Medea, why do you keep showing up?
Right.
It's the most transgressive, horrible thing in the world,
Why
right?
are you doing this to yourself?
But there's something super amazing about the human condition, about seeing ourselves, or in our most base and our most... suspense is an extraordinary thing. There was a beautiful NPR article about can we mention NPR when we're in another?
We can. We'll believe it.
Okay. So there was something very interesting a few weeks ago or last week about how a computer senses suspense. And I thought that was really interesting, that we eventually we're going to give computers over to our children, I mean, there's one thing they lack is in these games and all that is that sense of suspense. Only you can bring that in your human emotion, right? So can we give that human emotion to a computer? Then we'll be complete, and then we could just be Soylent Green, and then computers could
Right.
exist.
Right.
But it was interesting because I was thinking a lot about that, just this notion of how suspense works, you know?
Thinking about Medea, it seems like there isn't. I mean, there is suspense, but there isn't suspense in how you're just sort of like waiting. We are waiting for the act to happen, and how there was at one point the first audience who
That's
didn't
right.
know. You know, the first audience didn't know, and that was the only fresh response to this.
Well, that and I'm bolstered by the argument that the Getty makes, which is at the big Greek festivals where you'd see these plays when they first kind of premiered, the first audiences knew the story. They didn't know what you were going to do with it, right?
Hmm.
So that first bold try, Medea was not it didn't even win the big prize, right? It came
Right.
in third
Yeah.
because people were so mad about what he did, right? But still satisfied by the fact that you paint an old shrew. It's that's somebody to hate, right?
Hmm.
Older woman who was with a little hair on her like mustache and all that. But you see that and you think, okay, so you see what he did is that he let her get away, right? Oh man. So there was something about every generation gets its shot, right? I think I have that quote that you've seen in class where I say it's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to.
Hmm.
And I think that's really, really important to think about how you speak to your generation, how you speak to your people, how you speak to your community. And, my community is always very different, right? It's not always the same. I think people think because I'm Latino that I'm only speaking to Latino people, but the community changes all the time. At the Getty, my God, I'm having this interesting kind of conversation just around the classical people, just the purist around what are you going to do with our story? And sometimes they're really like emotional with me about you can't do this, you can't do that. This must stay this way. But nothing needs to stay anyway, right? I think you can knock down the entire building. What is it? The Neil Diamond song that, they're only castles, let them burn, or something. In some way, I think it's like the reinvention. Just to reinvent is no fun, but to reinvent for the sake of creating a new argument, or a new idea, or a new way of thinking, or to jolt this audience into a new perspective, super exciting. So I just had a recent experience where we had a kind of luncheon to invite the local press, very local press, like the Palisades Post, and I'm making up names, but like the Malibu Mailman, and the Malibu Mailman, and the whole bit, right? So it was hilarious, and it was the sweetest people in the world, sweet, sweet. But listen, they do not care a bit about what's going on in East LA. I was talking to one guy, and he was like, I don't go west, I don't go east of La Brea. I was like, I get it, right? And so we're talking and the whole bit. And it was just this really funny moment where I just thought like, that's my audience too, right? That's the crowd to convince that this experience is a very different experience. So what am I writing about? Well, yes, I'm writing a Medea, but I'm really writing about the undocumented in America. So I'm really challenging the audience to think about how the undocumented look in our country. And I do it not by saying the undocumented have been oppressed. And I'm not even taking like a sort of liberal or a conservative side on it. All I'm saying is that each undocumented person that you meet in this country is a face, is a person. So if we stop looking at an entire group of people as a number, we actually start to get a sense of a world, right? Of a sense of humanity. And then maybe that's the way we might approach making a better world, right? So it's interesting, when you're talking to these journalists, because they think you're talking about, you know, killing children. And it's hardly the thing I'm focused on. I focused on the story of a woman who comes here.
Right, you've taken this famous story of Medea and you've turned it into a story of immigrants.
Medea was an immigrant. The original Medea was an immigrant. And when she landed, on these shores, the women looked at her and said, "Look at her, how vile. She what if their words were, she dirties our shores," right?
Mm.
Hmm. that's where it kind of first hit me. And I thought, oh, okay, Medea is like an illegal immigrant.
Wow.
Medea's undocumented, right? She shows up and they hate her. They hate her, right? So here's a kind of take on the story. So I have a Medea who travels, who goes on a journey in exile, and she's got a secret. And so I'm really keeping all the beats of Medea in my story. And so what I love is that, you have an artistic director here at theater, Michael McKetty, who's like a logical guy. And we just went out the other night after to this place called Izzy's 24-hour Jewish deli in Santa Monica for a late night dramaturgy session. And it was
Those
really
are the best.
Those are the best. They really are. But what was really great about it was I loved how his thing was like, I see you still have this, but you still have to make a case for it. You can't just say this is here because, Euripides put it in, right? You have to put it in, and you have to make a case for why you need to keep it in. So I love those kinds of conversations because really right now the writing is about why is this here? Other than you'll recognize it. That's not good enough because that's Greece too, right? Didi Khan's still there because is she still there? I don't think Didi
I like
Khan's
that
still there.
you've dropped Neil Diamond, you've dropped Grease 2. You've made some
Can you
pretty.
see my pattern of where I lie in the American cultural spectrum? I know you just the other day in rehearsal I was like talking to the young kids and I was like, what do you guys think of the Olsen twins? And they both looked at me like we have no idea what you're talking about. It was hilarious.
Yeah, because the Olsen twins are now they're an
They're
adult.
the
They're an
Olsen
adult
twin
cultural
grandmothers.
reference point. Right. I want to go back to Community and you being a Latino writer, and you were very much recognized and seen as that. And I wonder if that's a thing you feel. Like, do you feel that? Does it come with weight?
I think maybe having been raised political, I haven't been raised religious. What I feel is that I'm only responsible to humanity, to other people. I live in a world with other people, and I don't live by myself. This is not a world that I've created for myself. So in some ways, I've crossed over to that wonderful place, which I thought I would hate when I crossed over, but it's like it's kind of not about me anymore. It's about the next generation, right? So for me, it's about how do you help that next generation kind of kick it forward. I've had my 16 arrests and I've had all that stuff. And yeah, I could go still march on the line, but I think it's about, how you can help that next generation make their work and then be inspired by them and write your work. But for me, community doesn't feel like it's a weight. I belong to many communities, right? So I think that people see me as Latino first, yes, but I'm also gay. And I would say that my early work, my first 10 years of being a professional artist, Latinos wanted nothing to do with me. Not that they didn't want anything to do with me, they just didn't know where to put me. So I was really supported by the gay community, mostly by women, lesbians, who came to all my shows. And that's why I know like the women's building so well. And my mentors like Terry Wolverton, Eloise Klein Healy, all that gang is really a gang that was with me at the beginning, right? Then what happened is the Latinos were like, okay, we're growing up as a community too, and now there's a space for you here, right? So I always belonged, but I wasn't always sort of allowed to do the work, right? And so I just think that there's a lot of different communities I belong to, a community of artists, and, during the first NEA fights, I felt like, we were sort of like without color. That was a really amazing moment. We were just sort of defending the right of expression, freedom of expression. So that's how Holly Hughes and, John Fleck and people like that became great friends. It had nothing to do with necessarily, it was a lot to do with who we were as sexualized people, right? But less about color. So then that sort of establish a community. And I find that every step of the way, yeah, I belong to a lot of communities. I love it. I love being embraced by community. I embrace it. I work towards including it. The chief, maybe, responsibility that I have these days is when I go into a regional theater, I tell people now in my lectures, I don't just bring the play, I bring the audience. I mean, so, here we are at this extraordinary moment in history where, if you and I have gone to TCG conferences
Hmm.
and I mean diversity and inclusion, and I mean talk about the new America, and can you ignore that Los Angeles is now, largely it's the Latinos are the leading population, right? So you have all of this stuff going on in the world, and then at the same time we have Manhattan Theater Club's current, announcement of a season,
Right.
and that's just not just Portland Meadow, but who's a very nice woman, by the way. But a lot of other theaters, sort of, kind of maybe ignoring the cities and the country they live in, right? So where are we in that spectrum? So as we're having this conversation, somebody like Trump can really create a series of scare tactics and kind of what is refreshing speech to many that is about, separation, right? Rather
Right. Finally, a politician is telling it like it is.
yes.
But what is it that he's
Yeah,
telling
he's
like it
telling
is?
us, right? So I feel like in some ways, that's my political work these days, right? It's like I think it's maybe more sophisticated and harder to do than I've ever had to do. I love being at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, I love being there. And there's a lot of work to do. And even that feels like the most liberal and exciting theater. And yet, every time the season gets announced, there's some really, anything that has comment sections are like deadly.
Danger. Yeah.
Comment
Stay
sections
away.
where you don't have to own up to who you are is the worst,
Right.
right? And so I think a lot about that. I think a lot about the work we're doing. I think a lot about how we might diversify the theater, but also create a space for everybody. So I had this amazing experience 2 weeks ago. So I'm on this panel at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and it was just myself and the dramaturg Lydia Garcia, and so it was really fun. And Don Monique Williams, who's this wonderful theater artist in L.A., in Oakland, was moderating, and we're talking because we're both Latino. We were talking about Latino issues, and just a woman raised her hand, older woman, very sweet, and she said, "I'm really don't like it when you talk about your identity politics." I just don't like it. It separates me. It doesn't make me feel like I belong, and it makes me feel terrible. And so I said, "Well, let
Mm.
me just reassure you that I think of you as," and she's an older white woman, right? "I think of you as my chief investor. You've been there since the beginning. You have subscribed to my shows. You have put the money forward before, you've seen the show. You are essential to the conversation we're having in this country right now around inclusion. If you're not a part of it, it's not going to work, right? So it's in some big way, you are center to this conversation. But what's clear is that you also need to know that this place that you're feeling right now is how I have felt my entire life in the American theater,
Mm.
right? And how for Trevor Nunn to announce, his all-white Shakespearean productions is once again a kind of big fu to any notion that we belong in the world together, right? So I understand the reasons why he's doing it. He wants a kind of cultural authenticity. I don't think that really exists in the current agenda, right? The way he thinks it does. But, he's entitled as an artist to do that. So I would just say that we have a lot of work to do, right? We have a long way to go in terms of, when you have an audience member who feels that left out. And yet, I wonder if that audience member could have the empathy or the consciousness to think that for the last, for years I went to see plays that never featured me. Ever. Right? Ever. For years I've been in regional theaters where I'm the only Latino there and I'm only there for a season, right? uh, this is just part of the reality that you live with, and you're always you can be angry about it. And once, maybe because I was raised in so much religion, I say to myself, I'm never angry. I'm like so joyful. I'm grateful to get up in the morning and be able to do work. And for me, work is to make art, right? I am so grateful for this opportunity that I come to the theater with so much joy, even when the theater sometimes says, I don't want you, right? I come to it um, with the expectation that I'm going to work towards a better theater, right? And so for me, it's always about the yes, right? I'm a yes guy. And my early career, I would say I got in trouble with a lot of people because I said yes to everything. But I actually don't think that's such a bad way to work. You know, I said yes to so many things that I had so many amazing experiences I wouldn't have had, right? And I say yes to the most ridiculous things sometimes, right? Even like last week, Rob Kent called me like in the last minute and said, "I read your Facebook thing on Lynn Manning's passing, who was a friend of mine, the playwright, and he said, "Would you write another one for American theater?" And normally if you're a playwright, you said like, "Oh my God, I don't know how to do this," but I was like, "Yes," and I wrote it in 15 minutes. He edited it, and then like by the end of the hour, it was up on the American theater site, right? And I was thinking, yes, just say yes, right? Just say yes to all the things that feel scary, to all the things that feel good, to all the things that can make you a better artist, right? So I'm always trying to do that. And I think because of that, I've become a bit of a diplomat. I do have friends. I have a jerk of a friend who lives in Culver City who writes such mean things about me on Facebook about, I'm a sellout, whatever, whatever. But you know what? I want to work in the world. I want to work in the American theater. I want to work outside of the American theater. I want to work with everybody. And I bring the best of who I am as Latino to the experience, and I join a world theater. So it's when I feel trapped inside something that doesn't feel like it's extending out. Like right now, I'm working on a Latino play, right? And I have all Latino designers, which is extraordinary. And it's making amazing art, right? Just the fact that there are 5, it's just unheard of. I was trying to think of when was the last time a major regional theater had all Latino designers, right? And then this all Latino cast, and I have this big white woman in the center of it directing it, right? So there's this interesting tension and excitement going on around that. If I didn't think that I was coming to Malibu to present my Latino experience to all of Los Angeles, it wouldn't be worth it. If I should just do it in East LA then, right? But if I'm going to do it, I got to do it for the world. I got to do it bigger.
I have to say the thing I was worried about in getting to know you when I first came to USC, and the thing that I so appreciate is that the fear was that I wouldn't be welcomed by you because I wasn't a writer of color. I was just another white guy
Yeah.
coming down the road. And that kind of scared me because I so yearned for, this
Yeah.
relationship, and that you were like, it didn't matter what the label was. It was who I was. But then on the other hand, getting to know you has helped set me on a trajectory to sort of like self-identify and figure out who I am, and start to answer those questions for me. And I think back to what you were just saying about that woman in the audience who was like, I feel alienated. And I could have chosen to feel alienated, but it was that feeling of alienation, which was a thing I needed to break through. And when I did, I went on this journey, and it's been an amazing journey so far. And I wish that audience member could see the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's when it's most exciting. I'm attracted to you because you're a good artist, right? You open your heart and you do work, right? And so we find our community everywhere. I think we have to learn from each other, and there are people that are in the field longer, and for various reasons. I think, I was thinking about this the other day. I was just thinking about people who go to New York and make it in New York, and then there are people who stay here and become regional. And I try not to create that separation for myself and for others. And there are people that I know who are in the equity waiver business, and that's where they're bound and they make their stuff, and all of it is valid, all of it is expression. And for me, I set a standard for myself of how I want to work and where I want to work, and I keep trying to push myself towards working towards everything, right? I would love to go to Canada more. I would love to go back to Europe. I'd love to really make sure that these plays live on beyond me. And so in a strange way, I think that has to do with the fact that you are at once Latino and you are at once a member of the larger world, right? And if we could keep making that connection that we are bigger than ourselves, the work gets bigger, the ideas get bigger, the language gets bigger, the writing gets bigger, everything gets bigger, but not in a kind of TV or movie blow up way, but your heart gets bigger, right? And the expanding of a heart and mind is what I think the theater does best, right? So we'll never do what film does, but we do something sort of really extraordinary, bring into the live art, and to feel that, is amazing. I was at the Tinseltown Theaters in Medford, Oregon, just a few weeks ago to see Inside Out. Is that what it was called? The film about the girl,
cartoon.
the cartoon. And I was like sitting there, and I'd gone by myself because it was like 116 degrees. I just like needed to get out of like the heat, and I go in, and I'm sitting there, and I'm having all those experiences. And of course, it's just a big cartoon. And then somewhere in the middle of it was like something happens to little Iris or Faye or what's her name, the little
I
girl's
don't
name.
remember.
But something happens to her. Did you see it?
Yeah.
And I was just like, right. I look around me, and everybody's trying to like not look like they're not crying,
Right.
right? And so, the woman next to me, she says, "It's deep, isn't it?" And this African American woman, and I said, "Yeah, it's deep." And then she says to the daughter, "You can cry." She goes, "This is what we do. You could cry, and you should cry anywhere." And I was like, oh wow, that's what happens to me in the theater all the time. And finally I was in a movie theater where it was like, oh wow, we're all emoting together.
I think that's where we're gonna stop.
Perfect.
On a crying note.
And a crying jag.
Right.
I loved it. What was her little name? What was her name? Do you know? The little
I don't
girl's
remember.
name? Nobody
Iris.
knows?
Let's say it's Iris.
Okay, Iris.
All right. Well,
Thank
that's
you
it.
so much.
Thank you, Luis.
This is great.
Yeah, I agree. Luis Alfaro's play Mojada, a Medea in Los Angeles, produced by the Theater at Boston Court, opens at the Getty Villa in Pacific Palisades September 10th. Full disclosure, I'm the marketing manager for the Theater at Boston Court. Go see this play if you're in Los Angeles. I don't say that as a marketer, I say it as a lover of theater. It's a gorgeous and powerful play. Thank you to Bill Bordy, whose generosity has allowed LA Stage Alliance to launch At This Stage magazine, which hosts this podcast. Thank you to Danny and Anna for making this all happen. The theme song for the Subtext is by International Pen Pal. Find them on iTunes, and then find us on iTunes and give us a rating, leave your feedback, and listen to past episodes. Keep in touch with us on Twitter at Subtext Podcast. Email us, thesubtextpodcast@gmail.com. And thank you for listening all the way to the very end. Next month, my guest is Barack Obama.